ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. The Philadelphia-based promotion rose as an alternative to the mainstream wrestling products being presented by WWE and WCW. It was a company born in anger. Paul Heyman had left WCW, disgusted with management, and after years of portraying over-the-top manager Paul E. Dangerously for the company, he'd had enough. Paul went to work for the original ECW in 1993, after failing to come to an agreement with Jim Crockett Jr. on the creation of a new wrestling promotion in Texas. Crockett wanted a traditional wrestling company. Heyman felt that was antiquated and had designs on creating something that would revolutionize the business. Philadelphia area pawn shop owner Todd Gordon was the owner of the NWA's Eastern Championship Wrestling. The company had also been booked by Eddie Gilbert Jr. On August 24, 1994, Shane Douglas would win the NWA title. He'd recite former champions, from Lou Thesz to Dusty Rhodes, from Buddy Rogers to Ric Flair, counting out the heritage of the famous championship. Then he told them all to kiss it, and he threw the belt down onto the canvas. The franchise, Shane Douglas, then declared himself the new ECW heavyweight champion of the world. 1994 was the year Eastern Championship Wrestling died and Extreme Championship Wrestling was born. A new era had arrived, and as is usually the case when things involve Paul Heyman, it happened in highly controversial fashion. Heyman would buy out Gordon in May of 1995 and become the sole owner of ECW. Under Heyman's leadership, the company would go on to produce over 400 episodes of hardcore TV, numerous annual pay-per-view events, and house show tours that focused primarily around the Northeast United States, as well as a video game, ECW Anarchy Rules, and even landing a national TV deal on TNN. ECW would give rise to such stars as Taz, Raven, Tommy Dreamer, Sabu, and the Sandman. But no one embodied the spirit of ECW greater than its biggest star, a man who blended the styles of martial arts, technical wrestling, high-flying, and straight-up hardcore combat, like the whole effing show, Rob Van Dam. Rob Van Dam, or RVD, the native of Battle Creek, Michigan, was trained by Detroit wrestling icon and the promoter of big-time wrestling, the original Sheik. Van Dam would go on to carry the ECW television title for over 700 days before vacating it due to injury. His run was highlighted by classic bouts with Jerry Lynn, Sabu, and the human suplex machine, Taz. Rob Van Dam stayed loyal to ECW until the bitter end, and for many wrestlers, the end left them more than just a little bitter. RVD had foregone what would have been lucrative contracts from either WCW or the WWE to stick with the upstart promotion and its cult following. Filings showed that as of the end of ECW's original run in 2001, Rob Van Dam was owed over $150,000 by Paul Heyman. ECW did not officially die in 2001, however. In spite of a notoriously lackluster invasion angle in the WWE that saw the influx of WCW wrestlers, sans the vast majority of top stars like Goldberg, Hogan, Nash, Hall, and Flair, as well as a smattering of ECW talents in an attempted takeover of the WWE, the angle featured Vince in charge of WWE, Shane leading WCW, Stephanie claiming ECW with Paul Heyman involved as well, but it just fell flat. It felt like a McMahon vanity project more than anything resembling a real invasion, the way Hall and Nash's arrival to Nitro had in 1996. The love of ECW didn't dissipate after the failed invasion storyline, as fans in arenas throughout the nation would break into EC-Dub, EC-Dub, EC-Dub chants in response to table-breaking moves and hardcore high spots during WWE events. WWE produced a documentary called The Rise and Fall of ECW. The nearly 3-hour documentary featured interviews with former talents, as well as Paul Heyman that told the story of ECW, albeit with a WWE slant. Sales of the DVD took off, and it would go on to become the second best-selling DVD release in company history. Shane Douglas felt the WWE documentary had whitewashed much of the history, as it had painted Vince McMahon as a benevolent savior who had only wished to help the young promotion. In response to this, Shane Douglas produced Forever Hardcore, what he had deemed the definitive account of the history of ECW, complete with numerous interviews with the company's former stars and a perspective that was missing from the WWE's telling. In 2005, WWE would present ECW One Night Stand from the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City. It served as a chance for the fans to pay tribute and offer the brand a proper send-off, and for WWE to further capitalize on its still popular holding. The matches, while announced in advance, weren't given any significant build on television prior to the pay-per-view. The event featured a raucous crowd. Its 7 matches all included wrestlers who had ties to ECW, though many were current WWE superstars. None of the matches went over 11 minutes, giving time for promos and angles to take place during the pay-per-view. One of those angles was the appearance of superstars from SmackDown as they took their seats in the balcony of the ballroom, led by JBL and Kurt Angle. JBL and Angle cut promos running the promotion down and referring to the location as a bingo hall. JBL's promo was interrupted by Rob Van Dam's music. RVD came to the ring wearing a knee brace. He was unable to compete on the show due to injury, but his presence was still warmly welcomed by the live crowd. RVD cut a worked shoot promo on his frustrations with WWE in the ring that night. Standing in the middle of the squared circle, while manager Bill Alfonso paced excitedly around him, a fiery Van Dam delivered. This pay-per-view is going to be one of the biggest of the year, and it's because these people, just like me, just like Fonzie, are sick and tired of having you and your likeness shoved down their throats every time they want to watch wrestling. Tonight, we give them what they want to see. ECW. The crowd broke into an ECW chant. RVD continued the verbal assault that targeted the corporate wrestling environment he'd now been confined in for the past 4 years. He went on. The office might be blind to it, but these people are going to let you know. I don't have any creative geniuses writing my script tonight, folks. So I'm going to take you back to a time before RVD's vocabulary was limited to whatever and cool. Remember that, Fonzie? Remember when RVD had a voice? Remember when these people would chant my initials from the opening of the show through intermission all the way to the main event? The crowd roared back in unison with an RVD chant. RVD finished the promo stating that missing this show was worse than missing WrestleMania, and that RVD is ECW. Rhino hit the ring and gored RVD, who rolled outside as the lights went black. When they came back on, Sabu was in the ring and began an impromptu match against the Man-Beast Rhino. The crowd would have to wait a little longer to see RVD wrestle under the ECW banner once more. The pay-per-view did over 300,000 buys, and given that success, as well as the massive sales of the ECW The Rise and Fall documentary DVD that had been released in 2004, WWE had designs on relaunching the ECW brand. And on May 25th, 2006, it was announced that the launch of a new ECW TV program on the Sci-Fi Network would be airing on June 13th. This would be the first time that ECW had its own television show since 2000, when TNN canceled the show after coming to terms with WWE to air Monday Night Raw. WWE included an exclusivity clause to be the only wrestling show on TNN. ECW, unable to find another viable television distribution network while facing mounting debt and internal strife, ultimately folded in 2001. ECW's intellectual property, tape library, and assets were purchased by WWE out of bankruptcy. While the death of ECW in 2001 was as volatile as its existence had been, with numerous wrestlers owed significant money, some having even gone into personal debt themselves in an attempt to help finance the operation. Creditors, most notably the acclaimed video game development company, had over $1 million in capital they claimed they were owed by the promotion. Paul Heyman lied, manipulated, and swindled in an attempt to keep ECW afloat. And while he received a great deal of ire for this behavior, deservedly so, during the death throes of ECW, it must also be noted that he used over $3 million of a Heyman family trust to fund the company at a loss for years, and would end up filing personal bankruptcy after his company's demise, his only remaining asset listed as $500 worth of clothing. ECW alum Al Snow gave his thoughts on Heyman. I think Paul is a great promoter and a terrific creative genius when it comes to utilizing a person's strengths on the air. But delegation and stuff like that is his downfall. He's a terrible manager. Heyman had been hired to WWE after ECW went under and had worked on screen as a commentator, the general manager of SmackDown, and a manager, most notably with young sensation Brock Lesnar. To further generate interest around the launch of the ECW show on Sci-Fi, WWE sought to put together a card that would be a major attraction for fans of both promotions. What better way than to square off the poster boys of both companies for the top prize in the game? Rob Van Dam, the whole effing show, who stayed loyal to ECW even when it may have gone against his own personal interest. And Vince McMahon's new favorite son, the man who ushered in the ruthless aggression era, the doctor of thugonomics, the champ, John Cena. Heading into One Night Stand, John Cena had held the WWE Championship for all but 3 weeks since winning the title at WrestleMania 21 in Los Angeles, California the previous spring. Cena had dropped the title to Edge when the Rated R superstar cashed in his Money in the Bank contract at New Year's Revolution that January. Cena had just survived a punishing Elimination Chamber matchup against challengers Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, Kane, Carlito, and Chris Masters. As a bloody John Cena laid on the mat after rolling up Carlito to secure the victory and retain his title, "No Chance in Hell" played over the sound system. Vince McMahon walked on stage and called for the chamber to be raised back above the ring. McMahon then announced Edge would cash in his Money in the Bank contract, and he hit the ring with Lita by his side before hitting multiple spears to finally put away Cena and capture his first WWE Championship. John Cena would exercise his rematch clause the following night on Raw. This would also be the episode where Edge and Lita had their infamous live, celebration segment. Ric Flair would come out during the celebration that had already gone on for a few minutes in front of the somewhat bemused live crowd. Flair would tell Edge he was dead in bed, then walk down to the ring thrusting his hips, preparing to give Lita a ride on Space Mountain. Edge delivered a concerto to Flair, busting his forehead open. Cena made the save, then delivered an FU to Lita. The rematch at the Royal Rumble was now set. Edge's reign would be short-lived, as just 3 weeks later at the Rumble from Miami, Florida, Cena would reclaim the spinner belt and begin his second campaign as champion. WrestleMania 22 kicked off from the greater Chicago area on April 2nd. Rob Van Dam would defeat 5 other competitors to win the second ever Money in the Bank ladder match, after the concept had been introduced at the prior year's WrestleMania. The match lasted just over 12 minutes. RVD would deliver a 5-star frog splash onto Finlay from the top of a ladder before ascending again to knock Matt Hardy and Shelton Benjamin off to the outside of the ring to claim the briefcase. That night at Mania, John Cena would successfully defend his title in the main event against Triple H. The crowd was staunchly behind Hunter, even though Cena was the babyface in the matchup. Cena would kick out of a sledgehammer shot to the head before locking in the STFU, forcing the game to tap out, even though he was just inches away from the ropes. On April 30th at Backlash, Rob Van Dam and Shelton Benjamin would battle in a winner-take-all contest that pitted perhaps the 2 most gifted athletes on the roster at the time against one another. RVD would put his Money in the Bank briefcase on the line against Shelton's Intercontinental Championship. They fought for nearly 20 minutes of fast-paced action, with RVD hitting a Van Terminator using his briefcase before landing a frog splash for the pinfall victory. Also that night at Backlash, John Cena would face his opponents from the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania that year, as he took on Edge and Triple H in a triple threat match with the WWE title on the line. Cena would lift both Edge and Triple H up for an FU during the bout. Edge would jump off and hit the ropes, delivering a spear to Cena while he held Triple H on his shoulders. Outside the ring, Triple H would be slingshot into the ring post by Edge. Hunter immediately started pouring blood from his forehead. Before Edge could tap out to the STFU in the ring, Triple H struck Cena in the head with a microphone to break the hold. A very bloody Triple H would power himself to the ropes while in the STFU as well. Then a series of finishing moves were countered, with Cena receiving a low blow, then just seconds later countering the pedigree into a roll-up for the pinfall victory. Rob Van Dam would drop the Intercontinental title back to Benjamin 2 weeks later. Now just holding the Money in the Bank briefcase heading into the summer, Rob Van Dam would cash in that Money in the Bank title shot against John Cena at that year's One Night Stand. On the June 5th episode of Monday Night Raw from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Rob Van Dam and John Cena participated in a contract signing segment for their WWE title match at One Night Stand the following week. Cena and Van Dam signed the contract and shook hands. Then Heyman introduced a flavor of ECW that was to come for Cena. Balls Mahoney, Tommy Dreamer, Terry Funk, and the Sandman came to the ring and attacked Cena, with Sabu putting him through a table before the Raw locker room chased them out of the arena. Heyman had been interjected into the storyline in a way that mimicked the tone of the Invasion angle of 2001. But the behind-the-scenes involvement was more interesting than anything that had appeared on camera for this feud. Heyman's run with WWE, much like his time in WCW and ECW previously, was not without confrontation and controversy. Paul had been working as a member of the SmackDown writing team in WWE that was being led by Vince's daughter, Stephanie McMahon. During a writers' meeting, Stephanie told Paul to include a segment that Paul knew that Vince had already disapproved of. Heyman told her that he wasn't going to put it in on account of Vince's preferences. Stephanie told him to put it in or she would do so herself. He told her, in that case, she should be the one to include it. Stephanie cut him off before he could finish. Paul, if I were you... This time, Heyman cut her off. But you're not me, because you've never built anything up from scratch. You've never had to fight back for your very survival, so you're definitely not... Stephanie screamed into his face before he could finish. Shut up! Heyman replied, F off. Stephanie then stormed out of the room. Heyman was, unsurprisingly, removed from the writing team, but still kept his job with the company. Then in 2005, Heyman was sent to Louisville, Kentucky to take over the booking of Ohio Valley Wrestling from Jim Cornette. OVW was the WWE developmental territory of the time. With his contract nearing an end in 2006, Heyman reached a deal with WWE where he would be involved in the relaunch of ECW and the new program on Sci-Fi. But the contract would allow for either side to terminate the agreement at any point. Fans were quite skeptical that the more sanitized and corporate style of WWE would be able to do the gritty, counterculture feel of prime ECW justice, and as it would turn out, rightfully so. While Paul Heyman had been put in charge of creative for the new ECW, as has always been the case with Vince McMahon, everything is ultimately left to his final decision within the company. Heyman said in an interview about the new venture, "The only person who has power is Vince McMahon. He is single-handedly the majority stockholder and can do any damn thing he wants. How much influence will I have? As long as corporately they're open to making this an alternate product with a different vision, a different look, and a different theme, I think I'll have a significant influence." The relaunching brand was given a considerable amount of exposure and resources to promote the new weekly show. 4 days prior to the 2006 One Night Stand pay-per-view, a WWE vs. ECW special was aired on USA Network from Dayton, Ohio. The card featured Rob Van Dam taking on Rey Mysterio in singles action, Big Show winning a cross-promotional battle royal for ECW after tearing his Raw t-shirt away to reveal the Extreme logo before last eliminating Randy Orton, Edge defeating Tommy Dreamer in an Extreme Rules match, and John Cena winning by disqualification in an Extreme Rules match against Sabu when Big Show hit the ring and attacked Cena while wearing an ECW shirt. The show ended in a schmoz finish as wrestlers from the 3 different brands fought in the ring. While the 2005 edition of One Night Stand served as a nice dose of nostalgia for fans who had to watch their beloved promotion collapse, and also created a way to monetize on the intellectual property now owned by WWE, still doubts remained about how true to the original concept WWE would keep their new ECW program. The WWE was willing to overlook past transgressions and internal issues with Heyman, namely on behalf of Stephanie, to bring Paul Heyman into the fold to help the new ECW show's chances for success. The second ever ECW One Night Stand took place on June 11, 2006, live from the Hammerstein Ballroom in Manhattan, New York, in front of a sold-out crowd of 2,460. According to WrestleNomics, the show did around 300,000 pay-per-view buys, generating millions in revenue for the WWE. This was also the first pay-per-view that was held at the increased price point of $39.95, up from $34.95, and while at the time WrestleMania had its own price of $49.95. The show opened with the ECW theme song blasting throughout the Hammerstein Ballroom, and the introduction of Extreme Visionary Paul Heyman. Heyman walked to the ring wearing a black leather trench coat and an ECW baseball cap while receiving a resounding ovation. Heyman delivered an in-ring promo, and it resembled the motivational speeches he used to give the ECW locker room to get them fired up to the point of being willing to sacrifice life and limb for the betterment of the promotion and the enjoyment of the fans. Paul E. grabbed a mic and proclaimed, "The tribe of Extreme has risen again." Heyman stated that the new TV show on Sci-Fi didn't happen because of him. It didn't happen because of Vince McMahon. It happened because the phrase "backed by popular demand" had never rang more true than with ECW, and it was all back because of the fans. Heyman then got on his knees in the middle of the ring and thanked the live audience repeatedly. Heyman welcomed everyone to the rebirth of ECW. The card kicked off with an announcer feud. Taz took out the staunchly anti-ECW antagonist, Jerry the King Lawler, with the Taz mission after Lawler slapped the glasses off of Joey Styles during his ring entrance. Kurt Angle, who would now be featured on the new ECW program, even though he had walked out of his first and only visit to the original ECW, after he felt the content was offensive, deciding it was not the right place for him to launch his wrestling career. He would take on WWE star Randy Orton. The match was a skilled technical exhibition, with the ECW crowd strongly behind Angle, loudly and profanely chanting against the Legend Killer the entire contest. The live audience was hot, but it would get even hotter as the night progressed. Kurt Angle picked up the win in the 15-minute bout when he grapevined Orton's leg and cranked in the ankle lock, forcing the submission. JBL made another appearance from the mezzanine, just as he had done at the prior year's One Night Stand, to trash talk and rile up the fans in attendance. Rey Mysterio wrestled for the second consecutive year at One Night Stand, defending the World Championship, as it was then being called, the Big Gold Belt, against Sabu. Both wrestlers began the match holding steel chairs. The match is famous for its non-stop, hardcore high spots, with Rey putting Sabu through a table with an aerial attack from the ring to the outside, and Sabu returning the favor with a springboard from inside the ring to a DDT through a table propped between the barricade and the ring apron. The match was then ended due to a doctor stoppage, with many speculating online that Mysterio may have suffered a broken neck as he writhed in pain on the mat outside the ring. The no contest finish allowed both men to stay strong after a fan favorite back and forth matchup. Mick Foley and Edge, accompanied by Lita, opponents just months before in a brutal hardcore match at WrestleMania 22 that included a barbed wire bat and a flaming table finish, took on Tommy Dreamer and Terry Funk with Beulah McGillicuddy in a hardcore match. After words were exchanged between Lita and Beulah, the match became a 6-person tag. Fans got to see Funk and Foley do battle once more, harkening back to their wars in the early days of the promotion in the 1990s. The 18-minute match used garbage cans, ladders, and various weapons, as well as a barbed wire board that Foley would pull strands off of and use against the face of Terry Funk. After this, Funk would leave to the back with a laceration bleeding heavily, then return to make the save with a flaming 2x4 wrapped in barbed wire. He'd strike Foley across the back with it, causing his flannel cut-off shirt to go up in flames. Foley would then be knocked off the apron and crash through the barbed wire board at ringside. Foley would later be sprayed with a fire extinguisher. Funk would join him on the board moments later. Edge hit a spear on Beulah and then suggestively covered her for the pin. Balls Mahoney defeated Masato Tanaka in the next match. It was positioned as a buffer between the hardcore tag team match and the main event, often called the popcorn match, or a bathroom break match, but the crowd didn't seem to miss a beat. Fully engaged in the bout that Mahoney won with a stiff chair shot to the head of Tanaka. It was now time for the moment everyone had been waiting for. The main event. Worlds were going to collide. Signs hung from the balcony. If Cena wins, we riot. Cena sucks. Rob Van Dam Revolution. And we came to see Cena die. But just as the crowd worked itself back to a fever pitch, Eugene, the mentally challenged WWE superstar, came out and read a poem. Then Sandman came out and caned him, and the crowd gave a massive pop. Okay, it was now the moment everyone had actually been waiting for. RVD came to the ring to what can only be described as a hero's welcome. Joey Styles said that RVD was the greatest wrestler in the world to never hold a world championship, and tonight that may be rectified. The sustained ovation for RVD turned into a resounding chorus of boos, jeers, and chants when John Cena's music hit that appeared to come from a crowd much larger than just the 2,600 in attendance. But their fervor was just that strong. Cena came to the ring holding his title above his head with both hands, and when he was introduced by the ring announcer, he threw his ball cap and shirt into the crowd as he always did. However, this time there was no lucky fan in the crowd excited to take home a piece of memorabilia. This time, John Cena had his shirt thrown back at him time and time and time again, as Cena masterfully played up his role as an unwelcome guest in the House of Hardcore. The match began with deafening ECW and RVD chants that quickly turned into F you Cena, a mantra that would be repeated at various times throughout the main event. Toilet paper was now being thrown on Cena as they prepared to lock up in the center of the ring, and when Cena gained the advantage early on in the contest, "You can't wrestle" was the fan response in the arena. Cena would attempt new moves outside of his maligned 5 moves of doom, a phrase used to deride Cena's limited arsenal in most of his matches. Cena hit a cradle suplex and even a top rope to the outside axe handle smash that earned him the response, "You still suck." When the two competitors exchanged right hands in the center of the canvas, each punch landed by Cena triggered a boo, and by RVD a loud yeah of approval. This went back and forth until RVD gained the advantage, knocking Cena to the mat. Joey Styles and Taz continued to comment about the unprecedented audience reaction and never having experienced anything like the environment in Manhattan that evening. The men would fight outside the ring, and Cena would launch RVD into the third row, countering a Van Dam move. Cena would follow him, and they'd fight throughout the crowd. Fortunately, Cena was only verbally accosted by the hostiles around ringside. RVD would introduce a chair to the match and hit a series of his signature moves with it, including a Rolling Thunder, where RVD landed flush on his back on top of Cena on the chair, but attempting his split-legged moonsault was countered by Cena, giving the champion the advantage once more, following up with a slingshot into a chair positioned in the corner, snapping Rob Van Dam's head through the metal seat of it. Referee John Finnegan would call for a rope break of the STFU as RVD had reached them, but Cena would keep the hold locked in. Finnegan would get in Cena's face after, and the champ would end up striking the ref. SmackDown referee Nick Patrick would then come out to count a pin attempt by Cena, with RVD kicking out at 2. This led to a loud F Nick Patrick chant from the crowd. A tall figure in a motorcycle helmet and a trench coat would spear Cena through a table propped in the corner of the ring, then knock out Nick Patrick before removing his helmet to reveal himself as Edge. "Thank you, Edge" chants came pouring down from the capacity crowd. RVD hit the top rope and delivered a 5-star frog splash to Cena. Then Paul Heyman came out from the back and hit the ring to count the 1, 2, 3. The bell was sounded. The crowd chanted ECW. Heyman raised Van Dam's arm as the announcer declared him the new WWE Champion. RVD hopped over the guardrail and walked through the crowd to his fiancée while ECW stars gathered in the ring. RVD returned to the ring and was lifted onto the shoulders of Big Show and Angle as his name was chanted throughout the building. The show went off the air during the whole effing show's victory lap in front of his loyalist. It was a crowning moment in the career of the anti-superstar, the man who didn't fit into the square peg version of a sports entertainer that Vince McMahon liked to promote. RVD stayed true to himself throughout his time in every promotion, overcoming injuries and continuing to utilize his unique offensive skill set in the ring. As special as this night was in the career of Rob Van Dam, and for all the buzz it generated for the launch of the new ECW show on Sci-Fi, the period would be short-lived. Just 22 days later, Rob Van Dam would drop the title to Edge in a triple threat match on Raw. Rob Van Dam had been pulled over while traveling with Sabu weeks later. A search of their vehicle turned up pain pills and marijuana. RVD would serve a 30-day suspension after this, and his naysayers and upper management would use this as further ammunition to attempt to keep him from the top of the card in the future. While the reign wasn't as great as it could have been, for that one night, that one moment in time, WWE and ECW captured lightning in a bottle. It's a match that can be shown to non-wrestling fans as an expose on what passion, pageantry, and energy can manifest in an arena when everything comes together in the world of professional wrestling. For that one night in June of 2006, Rob Van Dam and his friends got to live out a surreal fantasy. As for their new show on the Sci-Fi Channel, for those fans, and for us, that's a different story.